Hi, and congratulations on completing week one of our Old Testament course. This week was entitled Hermenheu, an Introduction to Hermeneutics. I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes going over our assignments and giving you just some pointers to keep in mind as you move through the course. So we had two assignments, or two written assignments, and one discussion post. The first was identifying parallel structures, and you were to diagram the parallel structures found in the three passages on the worksheet entitled 1.1 Parallel Structures Worksheet. Based upon your analysis, you were to state the key point. And we're looking this week at chiasms, and I did a little lecture, video lecture on chiasms to help you, but essentially these are a narrative passage that is written such that there are parallel structures moving in kind of a V, chiasm for X, but in a V nature, so that the middle section of that passage is in fact the most important part. So your first one was Genesis 2, verse 4 through Genesis 3:24. And the key A1 and A2, or A and A prime, were creation of man and the establishing of sacred space. What's parallel about the end of this passage is punishing of man and the banishing of man and woman from the sacred space. So in chapter 3, 17 to 24, we have a discussion of punishing man and sacred space. In verse 2, verse 4 through 17, we have the creation of man and the establishing of sacred space. So you can see that those are in a way opposite, but in fact cover the same subject matter. In B and B prime, or B1 and B2, we have creation of woman and the establishment of human community. And then we have the punishing of woman and the disrupting of community harmony in 3:16. So you can see how your writing of these need to identify the parallel nature of the topic or subject matter. And the biggest deductions we had in this assignment were you may have identified the right passage, but you didn't identify how these were in fact parallel. It's critical in that center, or the chiastic center, is sin and God's confronting it. So the whole idea of mankind being punished and God confronting sin is our center and key part of the Genesis passage. In Exodus 6, verses 2 through 8, a small chiasm, verse 2 says, I am the Lord. Verse 8b says, I am the Lord. Verses 3 and 4 give the Israelites the land of Canaan. Verse 8a gives the Israelites the land of Canaan. Verses 5 and 6, rescue Israel from bondage in Egypt. Verse 7b rescues Egypt from bondage in Egypt. And so our central is God takes Israel as his people. And that is a key passage to where we know that's the center, because the authors wrote this narrative in such a way that it was a chiasm, a poetic structure that the reader at that time would have understood, and shows that God taking Israel as his people is the point of that passage in Exodus. Finally, we have Joel, where the first part of the passage, God dwells in Zion. And in the last part of the passage, God dwells in Zion. First part of the passage after that, 17b, Jerusalem is holy. And then we have Jerusalem and Judah are preserved. A little further apart, but we have this idea that a community is holy and understood to be a part of God, leading us to our center, the blessings of the kingdom. So that's the type of idea that we're looking for in a chiastic analysis. In assignment 2.1, which was effective biblical interpretation. So as we look at the reading incline gave us 4 challenges to effective biblical interpretation. I wanted you to list those. And then the key to the assignment is explaining how a biblical student might understand and might overcome or address the listed challenge. That was the core I wanted to see engagement with Klein, and I wanted to see engagement examples and evidence from the Bible on how this might be true, and then solid, well thought out ways that we can address it. I asked you to include an introduction and a conclusion. So pieces where people got tripped up on the assignment, some people didn't give an introduction or a conclusion. That took off points. Some people didn't engage in the Bible or didn't engage with the reading or give any biblical examples. Took off a little bit for that. I'll take off quite a bit more as the semester goes on. Most people wrote this as a paper as opposed to just a paragraph and then bullet points and an explanation. Didn't matter. Whichever way you went on it was fine with me, as long as you mastered the material and gave some good information. And then finally, I wanted you to tell me biblical interpretation. Is it more of an art or is it more of a science? I would say the class was about 80-20. Science is a little more important. Everyone noted that both are important. And then I wanted you to write a couple of paragraphs. So one of the notes that someone, and I've forgotten who at the moment, but one of the students brought up that we all do biblical interpretation today. Everyone who goes to church reads the Bible and interprets it. The question is, how are we interpreting it? And that's what this class is truly about. Just like when you take a course in theology, we're all doing theology now. We read a passage, we make a theological determination. It just may not be a well-informed theological interpretation or biblical interpretation. And I hope that as we move through this course, you'll be able to pick up the tools to identify genre, use that identification to better understand the passage, and then find the best way to present that interpretation to a modern or contemporary church audience. So as we look at kind of just the general ideas, timeliness, a student completes the required post and response on time. That's my first grading point. While the discussion is still current, responses made over the course of the week and are not batched as comments over one sitting. I give full credit for 3 or more response sessions, not 3 or more comments, but 3 or more logins between Thursday and Monday, where you are checking what students have written to you, you are responding to them, and you're responding to one another in a more meaningful discussion. I'm also, if we look at the key points to interpretation, which is what this was about, the Bible was written a long time ago, far, far away, to a people that had a different language and culture from our own. You will need the tools and methodology to bridge each of these gaps. So to me, that's what this assignment was about. We need to understand that it was a long time ago in a faraway place, looking at a people who had a different language and culture, and we need the scientific tools to be able to uncover historical context, to better understand their culture, to have some idea through biblical translations of their language, and then again looking at historical context, archaeology, to better understand the fact that they were a long way away from us in time, bridging time gap. Those types of ideas I wanted to see in your responses. Keep in mind the idea that a biblical text has one meaning and many applications. And we're going to explore this further in week 2 and as we go through the course. And I'm going to ask you, is this statement true? Is it not true? And right now you probably say it is. Some of you will disagree with me over time. But the original author wrote this passage in the leading from God. The original author wrote the passage to be understood by the original hearer. So when the author wrote or spoke this passage, the original hearer had an understanding. And I would argue that is our first and perhaps most important understanding of a passage is how did the original author, as inspired by God, write such that the original hearer understood what they were saying. Now that sounds wonderful, and we can have lots of different applications based upon that. But we find in the New Testament that in fact Paul, as a good example, and Jesus, as another great example, takes passages that are in the Old Testament and seemingly interprets them in a different way. And that is sensus plenior, or a fuller understanding. And we'll talk about that more as the course goes by. So thanks for all the effort this week. Have an awesome week in week 2. I think the grades were really good. As a quick example, and I've covered it up here, Bible and not Bible. So as you look at capitalization, Bible is a book, kind of an important book for this class. And so when you use lowercase, I will count off. By the end of the semester, if you're still doing it, it will be 5 points on every assignment that you use a lowercase b. So please start now with a larger b when I don't count off for it. Also, biblical is little b, not capital B. And then be sure to use evidence in your discussions and your papers from both the Bible as illustrations and engagement with the reading and outside research as evidence for your reflective positions. So thanks for all the hard work. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to week 2.